Hello everybody, welcome back to Planet Coaster 2 and welcome back to Le Jardin Magique. This is of course our theme park set in an imaginary country in Northern Europe, owned by an imaginary animation studio and filled with imaginary rides and attractions based on the IPs of said animation studio. Today's update in the park is a big one. In fact, it's so big, we're going to split covering this ride into multiple updates because, well, in truth, it's not quite finished yet, and some of the final bits I think are going to take a little while to come to fruition. So we'll have the first episode today where I'll just talk you through what I have so far and how all that came to be, and then next time we'll get SP Ridley on and we'll talk about the lore and I'll show you the rest of the ride, and hopefully by then we'll have a full POV to show off. So yeah, without further ado, I believe this is the earliest available save file that I have of the beginnings of this ride. I basically started working on this almost immediately after finishing work on the Siege, and I knew from the very beginning that this IP was going to be some kind of thrill coaster basically, probably a launch coaster, and once they added the Intamin Blitz that basically cemented it. And as for the actual IP itself, it's basically kind of it's sort of Cowboy Bebop meets Lupin the Third, by which I mean it's kind of anti-hero bounty hunters in space who are being chased by the police, and they're sort of going up against a sort of organised crime syndicate of Greek gods. Did I mention the whole thing is themed to kind of ancient Greece? So it's Greek mythology in space with bounty hunters, and yeah, it's called Europa 2898, and I have to say that SP basically came up with all of this. Unlike with the Crocus stuff, this was basically SP's whole idea. As soon as I was thinking about this ride, I just had this image in my head of this futuristic classical Greek facade where you're sort of blending elements of sci-fi with the classical Greek architectural elements. You know, we've got the classic pillars and yeah, I knew that I wanted it to have this kind of slightly futuristic hint of Art Deco to give it a kind of futuristic feeling. Off the back of that, I also knew I really wanted it to have this kind of stepped fountain in front of the building, which is sort of loosely inspired by, I think it's a railway station in Cincinnati, I want to say. I'll chuck up a reference image of that. And so yeah, as you can see here, this was basically how I wanted the area to be laid out. So you've got this kind of plaza, and then the entrance to the ride would be up at the top of this fountain stepped area. And the original idea I'd had was that you were going to kind of come through a sort of indoor queue area. The station would be up to the side here in another similar one of these Greek temple buildings. So yeah, you'd sort of come out of the station and launch off this way into a spike, and then you'd exit down a sort of ramp into a big circular gift shop area here. So that was the very first kind of version of it. And then at some point I was talking to Nitro about this ride. I can't remember when and where this was happening, but the suggestion was that part of the ride should be a dark ride. And obviously I hadn't initially been planning to do that, but it was one of those sticky ideas that I just couldn't shake off. So when it came to actually building the ride, I started rethinking what the layout of everything was going to be, and that involved then thinking, well, if we're going to have a dark ride section, then the coaster should start indoors and you'll have a sort of flying through space section, and then we would launch outside of the building here somewhere, and the rest of the coaster would come around, you know, outside the front of the building, and then we go back inside. And at this point I'm thinking, you know, the queue will come in here, we'll somehow get to the other side of the station platform, we'll use this space here that's been created by the launch to fill out with queues and stuff. And at this point you can see I kind of got the layout of the indoor section of the ride basically finalized. It has been tweaked a little bit in the final version, but yeah, the basic idea is there, where you've got like a kind of a helix, and then you've got this kind of vaguely figure of eight-ish type thing happening with a couple of inversions and helixes, and there's this cool area here where the track is kind of tripled up coming in and out of these launches, and with this little helix here. The main issue with this was that obviously in order to cover this up you would need an absolutely huge, very tall box. So if we just jump forward again into a different save file, you can see here I've started trying to deal with that kind of with varying levels of success. Obviously the main thing was sinking the ride down into the ground so that the highest part of the ride is not as high. This hill had to be lowered a little bit, likewise with this sort of overbanked turnaround here, and so that gives us this kind of thing where if you kind of stand at ground level from the back of the plaza here, you just about can't see the very top edge. Obviously I was planning to kind of cover this side on the left here so that you wouldn't be able to see it. Obviously in that case I wasn't accounting for the fact that in reality you would be stood sort of probably back here, and obviously the further back you come, the more the more that the perspective gets compressed and you can start seeing more of the building. So the next step really was to just basically get this into the file, start figuring out what the rest of the layout was going to be and how I was going to deal with this. So That brings us here into the actual park file, where we've got now the coaster with the full layout. You can see outside here I basically decided we'd go into a sort of a trench under the path and then up into a stall, into a helix, into a kind of a banked airtime hill, into this inversion here. Then we come into an Immelman to turn around and go back the other way. And then it's basically a series of airtime hills to get us back to the brake run over here. Just turns into an airtime machine at the end, basically. And then just jumping forward again, you can see I've started thinking about how the pathing is going to weave around the ride and connect up to the plaza in front of the ride here. Obviously this is all kind of placeholder at the moment. I've got a rough idea of what's happening here, but the way that this connects to here obviously will be refined. But my thinking is that the main approach to the ride will be from this direction. There'll be a sign in front of this tree sort of suggesting, you know, that this is the way to the Europa area. You get this cool framing of the top hat through the trees here, and then obviously as you come around you get the coaster going over you, and then yeah, importantly by weaving the path through this way we then get to have the approach into the plaza, having us face directly toward the main entrance to the ride. This little cover here is going to be a sort of quick service food restaurant with some seating next to the trench here, so you can enjoy the coaster going past. And then on the left here is where the ride will exit. This will be your gift shop, on-ride photos, all that kind of stuff. And the exit from the ride here will connect up to a pathway here. So yeah, jumping forward once again into another version of the park, you can see there's been quite a major change this time. There's been a major change and then a more subtle change has happened. So maybe a day or so later, I think SP had been in the park doing some building in the dark ride, and he'd been checking this out and he observed that we could build a kind of forced perspective weenie up behind the entrance here. Obviously it adds to the theming and it looks epic, but it also very handily helps to kind of cover up the top of the building there when you're coming from the approach. And another thing that really helped with that, I basically just selected everything like this except the ride and raised it all up by 0.5 meter or 2/3 of a meter, something like that. The main reason I did that was because I was kind of struggling with drop into the trench here, was hitting some pretty gnarly G-forces, and the only way I could find to sort of tame that was to kind of reduce the depth of this curve here slightly. And that meant that the clearance with this bridge was getting really bad. So I was umming and ahhing about what to do about this. And then I remembered that I could simply select everything, just move it up slightly, because that is something you can do in Planet Coaster 2 now. So yeah, I did that and I moved everything up very slightly. That also just had the nice effect of kind of creating this really pleasing kind of soft berm between this lower part of the path and the area where the plaza is. Okay, this is just editor mineral from the future here, and I just wanted to pop in quickly and talk a little bit about doing this whole path raising thing, because there's a little bit of a knack to it, I think, which I just figured out recently. So let's say I've built this path like this, and I want this side to be higher up than this side. What I would do is come in here, select, say, this, then press X to advance move, and we'll bring it up, let's just say for the sake of argument, 3 meters, like that. Then I would delete these curves that I had previously, something like that, and this joining path in the middle, and then rebuild those. But if you leave the terrain style on automatic, then what's going to happen is, you can kind of see this here, it builds a sort of 1 or 2 meter slope, and then the rest of the path is flat. But if we connect this using suspended, like this, it will build one gradient all the way from the 2 connection points. So from here to here is just all one long gradient, and then it just digs the ground out from underneath. And then obviously likewise it'll do the same on this side, and then if we set it back to straight for the middle one. And now what we've got is this really lovely gradient that's happening on the path, and then we can go into the terrain. And if we pull the terrain up underneath the path on level 100, so that the terrain directly underneath the path is flush with the path, and then we go to flatten to surface and grab the sample point underneath the path here, then we can flatten the terrain into a really nice sloping grade here between the 2 path levels, and then we've got this really nice subtle gradient going on across this whole kind of section here. And you know, you could use flatten from foundation from the top then, if you wanted, to create a nice kind of very subtle little grass bank here that's slightly raised on the lower part, whatever. The point is really just that you can use the advanced move tool with the path and then the suspended terrain style to create really nice path gradients, and then the flattened foundation or flattened surface afterwards to create really nice smooth path interactions. Okay, thanks, bye! So then you get this really nice kind of layered effect where you're kind of coming up into the plaza. And not only that, but it also helps to even further hide the top edge of the tallest part of the building there, because now you're at a lower level. You just cannot see the building at all, basically. Obviously back here, you can still see it, but it should be better covered up on that left side in general. But the main bit I wanted to hide was while you're here looking at this facade, that's when the illusion really needs to be maintained. The rest of the time, it's slightly less important. SP literally sent me a drawing of how he was envisaging this, which I'll put on the screen. Just so chuffed with how it came out. And just for reference on the force perspective here, if we take the stone guest, this tree is pretty small, but from down here, it really sells the effect. Something I keep forgetting to mention with this park is that we are using the scaling mod. The main reason that we decided to use that was so that SP could build the characters with a kind of high enough level of fidelity. So I'm not going out of my way to underscale lots of scenery and make everything kind of super detailed and overly complex, but there are moments where I'm pretty sure I'm making things smaller than what the game would normally allow you to do. Like I said, I'm trying not to overdo details using tiny pieces just because I will burn out super quickly if I start doing that for every building. But yeah, let's jump forward again. So at this point, most of what was left to do was to decorate, theme the area, finish out the exterior. Like I was saying in the intro, the sort of interior and the dark ride we will cover more extensively in the next episode. But yeah, as for the exterior, I'll just walk you over to the ride area from this point on the path down here. As you can see, the stall into the helix has been dug out so that it's fully over the water here, and that's all kind of fenced off nicely, looking very quaint. Again, the berm on the left here is all bedded in with hedges and a little bit of planting. Nothing too intense. I mainly wanted to keep it with this kind of grass bank here. I just really like how that looks. And then yeah, as we come up into the plaza area for the ride, on the right here we've got some cool spiky rock work. A lot of the intention here was about blending that Greek mythology with the sci-fi stuff, and hopefully it's all kind of tied together in a way that makes some amount of sense. Over to the right here, the quick service is now in place. French speakers, let me know in the comments if this is passing the sniff test. I dressed the trench up with this rock work to kind of tie it into the rock work around the whole facade and the weenie in the background. So from this angle and from some other angles, it kind of looks almost as though this is all part of the same mountain, or at least the same kind of area. The rock work is continuous all the way from there down to here. And then yeah, I just really wanted it to look as though the ride is sort of tearing through the land here. It's sort of splintering, and thought it'd be fun to have some little shards breaking off and then they're being supported by some some little pipes here. Mega chuffed with how that's come out. On the left side of the plaza here, I thought it would be nice to just have a little picnic area so that you can just sort of sit, soak up the vibes, watch the coaster go past, that sort of thing. And then I don't think I talked about this little path here yet, but this basically leads you around to a toilet here, which I've opted to not really theme at this point. I may revisit this and look at trying to make it a bit more themed, but I also kind of like the kind of mild theme park jank here, where you've got this like really heavily themed area and then right around the corner you've got a very generic looking toilet. I will say also, looking back from the entrance of the ride towards the other side, I really just love the way you can see the castle on the far side of the lake there with Le Siège towering over it. It's looking epic. And then likewise the sightlines in this direction towards the Crocus dark ride facade are looking very tasty indeed. Really chuffed with how that's all coming along. And I'd love to say it was completely intentional, but it's just kind of worked out that way. As for the actual ride itself, as I was saying before, it's kind of based around this IP that's sort of Cowboy Bebop meets Lupin III, set in Greek mythology in space. If you can pass that. And so the general idea with the ride is that you're helping out the kind of in-universe police force who are chasing the kind of main characters through space. I'll just bring you up into the first room here. We've got Standby, and then we've got Speedy Lane, which is this park's fast pass system. But yeah, the first room here, the idea is that you're kind of working with this slightly inept police force as they try to chase down the main characters who are playfully evading your attempts at capture. And yeah, like I say, I'm not going to show too much of the queue in this episode because it is largely incomplete at this particular moment in time. You can see currently there are lots of stark empty rooms that are waiting to be decorated. If I just move the roof out of the way, I can sort of show you the general layout of the queue. So you come in through the main entrance here, then it snakes around this way. Then we've got a series of rooms here, which are, as you can see, unthemed currently. And then it comes back on itself. And I will jump down into here, actually. You head up the stairs here. And then you're kind of into the station area here, which I have finished working on for now. And it's all still kind of playing into that whole, you're in the sort of police dispatch area where you're jumping in your space police vehicle and you head off into the ride this way. I will just show you this launch area into the dark ride section. We've got this cool launch tunnel that's kind of lit from the floor, and then we've got this fun launch sequence, which will all be supported by a custom soundtrack. Yeah, the ride flies off out of the station into the dark ride area over here, and then eventually makes its way back through the launch tunnel and then up outside into the spike. And I haven't decided at this exact moment in time if I'm going to show you a full POV of the ride in its work in progress state, if I just show you the outside bit of the ride and then show you the full thing next time, or if I just don't show you a POV at all. I have not decided yet, so I guess stay tuned to find out whatever decision I came to in post. But yeah, I think that's where we're going to leave it for now. I just want to give a shout out once again to SP Ridley for all the amazing help he's been giving me on this project in general. We just seem to have this kind of creative synchronicity where we're very good at bouncing ideas off of each other, and obviously wouldn't have come up with any of this stuff without his great ideas and character work and stuff. Also need to give a shout out to Taggy for helping me figure out how to make these fountain stairs look semi-plausible. In the end, we sort of settled on a combination of these water block pieces and rapids fountain pieces, and it's kind of a jumbly mess, but I think it sells the effect well enough. And then thanks to Jan and 4Piece, a bunch of other people that were helping me figure out the support specifically on this Immelman here. I was massively over supporting it initially. Looked at some pretty decent reference stuff from the Batman ride and Velocicoaster, and eventually landed on this, which I think I'm pretty pleased with in the end. As usual, you know, coasters are not my forte, so I've been really enjoying with this park actually trying to kind of force myself to build more coasters and get more and more used to the whole process of figuring out layouts. And it is one of those things where the more you do it, the less annoying it becomes, I will say. But I felt kind of bad having to lean on Kindly for every time I wanted a new coaster. I was like, oh, Kindly, can you build me a coaster? So I thought I really needed to pull my finger out and figure this stuff out eventually. So that's what I've been trying to do. So yeah, I'm sure, this isn't perfect. The layout could probably be better in numerous ways or whatever, but I'm pretty darn chuffed with it. Like I said, next time I'll get SP on and we'll talk more in depth about the IP and all of his inspirations and ideas on that. The queue will be finished. The dark ride portion, or I keep saying dark ride, it's really just the indoor portion of the coaster will hopefully all be finished, and the aim is to have a fully custom soundtrack, potentially with some voice acting and stuff. So yeah, I don't know if it's going to be the very next thing that I post on here, just because getting all that stuff together potentially could be a little bit more time consuming, a little bit more difficult to organise, etc. So yeah, as always, thanks very much for joining me. Hope you enjoyed today's episode, and I will catch you next time. Bye!